So I think it's trying to help negotiate through, the complicated accounting regime to try and, I always say, try and tell the picture. The account should show what's actually going on in this charity. It's impossible for a charity to have the right amount of reserves. You'll get criticised either way. So either you're holding onto your war chest and you're not spending enough, doing the good job that you should be doing, or you're not holding enough money, and therefore you're not demonstrating good financial governance and looking after, making sure that you're sensible.
Hi friends, welcome to the next episode of Between Me and You. Today I'm joined by Darren Harding. He's the Director and Head of the Charity Division at Richard Place Dobson. They're a chartered accountants, and you're also a trustee of the RPD Foundation, which I know we're going to be talking about in our chat today. We'll be diving into a crucial topic for any organisation, especially those in the for good sector. We're going to talk about strategic financial management. Darren brings a wealth of experience in helping charities navigate the complexities of accounting, auditing, and I think for me, one of the really important things is turning what you may see as a necessary cost into a vital investment for growth and the impact that you want to do. So as usual, I invite you to join the conversation, to share your thoughts in the comments, and let's get started. Darren, welcome to Between Me and You. It's really good to have you. I think to start, could you tell us a bit about your role at Richard Place Dobson and your experience in particular with working with charities? That'd be great.
No worries. Well, first of all, pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I'm always delighted to talk about charities, not-for-profits. It's a passion of mine. I joined Richard Place Dobson 2003. I think that just means I'm getting old now, the nicest possible way, but the firm's been going for about 120 years, so I'm very much a custodian of picking up things. I inherited a charity and not-for-profit client base of about 80 or so charities and not-for-profits. We've swollen that in the time I've been there up to more like 140 charity not-for-profit clients. We have a variety of clients we look after in there, from registered charities to friendly associations. We've got care homes, schools, and all of the above. We've got some larger national charities. We've got some charities that work internationally. And we've got a lot of very small charities, a lot of start-up charities. Certainly post-COVID time, there was a lot of new charities, community interest companies and such like that set up, and we work with a lot of those. Not just me either. We're a team of 60 or so people at RPD, 4 directors. There's 4 or 5 specific charity accounts prep and tax experts on the charity non-profit side, and then we have a team of 20 auditors, within which 5, 6 are specific charity auditor experts as well. So very well placed, hopefully, to advise the sector in my area of expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also understand that during your time there, you then set up the RPD Foundation. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I think that came... I'd call him my old mucker. That sounds awful to say it like that. But a chap I've worked with called Darren Bennett, another Darren. So we are Duran.
Yeah.
He spells his name wrong though, with F-D-A-R-A-N. Wrong completely. But we've worked together on quite a few charity not-for-profits over those 20 years or so. And it was he and I really that sort of thought that there was a bit of a gap and a space, I think, in the sector where it needed a bit of extra help and support. So just pre-COVID, we forged the idea really of the foundation, and it has 3. We call them 3 pillars in terms of its objectives. So the number one is to boost and build upon the charity work that we already do at RPD. So we always have our charity of the year. We go and support. We do quizzes, all the usual things you'd expect a corporate to do. Yeah. The second pillar, which is a massive project we're working on at the moment, and I know you've got other people we work with. I know we met Gavin recently. On the CSR side. So it's almost to help an awful lot of companies with their CSR responsibilities, corporate social responsibility, just to make sure that they're doing the right things and they think outside the boxes to really make a difference, I think, as well. And then the third area, I think, is what we call sector support. And that's where we think there is a gap. And I've seen this an awful lot. I work with the local CVS quite a bit as well, and they help a lot of not-for-profit groups get off the ground. But they get to a point where once they are up and set up, it's like, well, how do we run this thing now? Certainly from an accounts and governance perspective. And professional firms, be them lawyers, accountants and such like, are expensive in the nicest possible way. And to get, volunteers with that expertise is gold dust. So we thought there was a little space there where actually we could come up with this kind of like flat pack setup really for a new charity, which is one area of sector support we're giving. So working with the CVS guys, it's almost saying, right, okay, well, I've set up my kick. What do I do now? So, well, you need a bank account, for starters. We know where to go with that, and we've got an arrangement with the bank to set that up. You need some software. You probably need some software. This is the way you go about doing that. And you need some basic controls and procedures in place, and that's where we offer a bit of support as well. So it's the foundation sort of sitting alongside our expertise on the RPD side. We've also helped some larger charities as well. So Darren himself has gone into like an interim CEO role, where charities have found themselves at a loose end in between a CEO leaves and they've got a gap to fill. And Darren's done a great job in that space as well. But yeah, very much we're working with, well, it's all about collaboration, I think, in the marketplace, and we're just building partnerships.
Yeah, and I think when we first spoke about the foundation, one of the things you touched on there was CSR. And I remember you saying that a lot of people, when they think about engaging, so I'm a corporate, I'm an organisation that wants to support a charity, they immediately think about that from a point of view of handouts. But actually, you've touched there, it's often can be about expertise and provision of their team's time. That can be really valuable. So you help coordinate that with the foundation?
Yeah, well, the foundation's working on a pilot at the moment with a local industrial park, and we're engaging it ourselves. So almost to try and be, and this is where this gap is, to be like a brokerage service. So on this side, we've got a lot of corporates that, as you rightly say, we don't have the funds at the moment to go and give to this charity and that charity, but actually we do websites. So maybe we could help with a website or two. And then on this side, we've got all these charities that also need education from their perspective, where they're always looking out to try and get funds to buy a website. Well, actually, if you've got a website done for you, you don't need the funds to pay for it. So the brokerage project being, well, if we come up with a list of corporates or businesses or people that are willing to supply, rather than just money, support in some way or form. And then we've got a list of charities that say, well, we need X, Y, and Z. We can broker them together, mix them up, then, I think the effect on that could be absolutely huge.
Excellent. So now moving on to, I think one of the things I've experienced with many of the charities we work with, that when it comes to, well, like an annual report that we've just put together for a client, all that financial data that they put into the end of that quite large document, often there can be a perception that accountancy, auditing is a necessary cost rather than something that can actually bring benefit to the charity. And we spoke a couple of weeks back, and what I found really interesting is the experience that you and your team can bring is often not just doing what has to be done, but providing advice that turns cost into genuine investment and benefit to the charity. I think that's something people would be fascinated to learn more about. Can you give us some specific examples?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think audit is, it's like a bad word in some ways, isn't it? We don't like audit being reviewed. And I know one of my colleagues famously says she was told she was a statutory nuisance at one point in the past. And I thought that's rather unpleasant. But I guess if you're doing auditing properly, in my view, and certainly we approach this way, it's actually, yes, we've got a job to do. So when we go in and undertake an audit, the objective is to form an opinion on the accounts at the end of the day, to make sure that they're true and fair, and in those annual reports that are then going out to the public or whoever's going to look at them, it gives that security that the finances are in good order. I mean, that's the primary objective. However, rather than being the statutory nuisance getting in the way, I think it's adding value, really, in doing that with bringing our experience to those working with many other different charitable clients. So, for example, yesterday we had an audit planning meeting with a client that does a terrific job in the local community, providing transport to those in need. And we talked about fraud, which is what you have to do in a charity at the moment. And in the old days, it was very much around cash, looking at where's the cash going missing. Well, these days, there isn't much cash changing hands. We're all tappy-tappying now and doing such things. The bigger area of fraud at the moment, which we can advise clients on how to detect against, is more cybersecurity and attacks via that way. And we talked about a specific example. And literally later in the day, I got an email from the chap saying, I can't believe this. You mentioned it this morning and it's just happened today. So he received an email from the financial controller there to him, who's the chief exec, where there was an email attached to it at the bottom from supposedly him to the person there saying, we've got some invoices in at the moment to a recognised supplier of theirs. We owe £19,792. The payment's late. Can you make it ASAP, please? Never knew who to target, who to email, who to make it from, what it was in respect of. So what the financial controller said is, I haven't got the invoices for that. Can you find them for me, please? So it looks so compelling. And you know, the biggest way of guarding against that is training. At the end of the day, it's about being aware all those that are involved in making those decisions and looking at those things that out. And a couple of tips on there very easily. If you're not sure about it, if it's supposedly from a supplier, you just go back to your authentic contract with that supplier. Hello, apparently we owe you some money. And they'll go, no, nothing to do with us. Another common one is employees. A cybersecurity fraudster pretending to be an employee emailing a charity and saying, hello, I've changed my bank details. So when you pay me at the end of the month, please, can you pay it into this account? Very clever. Again, comes from, it looks like the person. So I guess what we're able to do is give a few hints and tips as to things to look out for. The second thing, I think there's a few misconceptions about the charity sector that springs to mind, and VAT is one of those, for example. So I think there's a common misconception that VAT does not apply to charities. It does. VAT applies to anybody. It's about the nature of the suppliers rather than what the underlying entity is. So whether you're a sole trader, a business, or a charity, not-for-profit, VAT applies. And it's quite easy to get involved. A lot of charities are doing wonderful things now to raise money, but you can stray beyond a donation perspective or a grant perspective to start trading. And if you start trading, then that might be VATable. And we need to make sure we don't miss that and make sure that we don't get in trouble with HMRC and account for VAT on anything that we need to. But where we would bring the value there is say, well, yes, okay, you need to account for VAT, but hang on a minute, we can recover all this VAT now that we're incurring, which we couldn't do previously. So there's ways that we can help.
I think also when we were preparing for this chat, we talked about the reserves policy and how you can deal with the numbers in a way so that it doesn't put off potential big corporate, support.
Yeah, it's going to be, again, you mentioned the annual report earlier on in terms of your presentation. Now, the annual report normally bolts on to the financial statements that go off to the Charity Commission. And they have to follow what's called the Charities SWOOP, the Statement of Recommended Practice. So there is a defined way you present them, but there is flexibility in there. And one thing we've done an awful lot for quite a few of our charities who are struggling financially, looking for grants. And what grant givers will do immediately, or donors, they'll look at the accounts. And if the accounts are perceived to be, well, actually, you've got loads of funds, you don't need the money, then they're less likely maybe to get those grants going forward. Now, a good example that springs to mind here, we had a charity that actually really does need the money, but their balance sheet shows an awful lot of assets. But all of those assets are pretty much tied up in a wonderful large building. So they don't have free reserves in order to be able to spend on charity things. It's all tied up in that wonderful building that they've got there, which they need to pursue their charity objects. So why not make sure that the accounts present that picture when you put it across? So that I mentioned the charity SORP, it's underpinned by a philosophy of fund accounting. And there's something called designated funds, which is a form of general fund where you can allocate funds to one side. And there's two reasons for doing that. Number one, it could be this building and say, look, all right, I might have a balance sheet of 3 million or so here, but actually I'm going to designate 2.5 million of that to represent what we've got tied up in this beautiful building. So by representing that to one side, we leave a better picture left. As actually, the charity only has about 500,000 of unrestricted reserves. And they're the ones that it needs. And if it's income or expenditure is £1 million a year, then it needs that sort of 3 to 6 months, 6 to 9 months worth of level of reserves. And I think by setting up that designated fund, you present the accounts in a way that I think hopefully helps charities, not-for-profits, when they are going out there and saying, look, we need something here. This is the reality of what it looks like. So I think it's trying to help negotiate through the complicated accounting regime to try and, I always say, try and tell the picture. The account should show what's actually going on in this charity.
And we've seen it with one of our charities. They had a new CEO come in who had ambition to help more people, which was fantastic. But it meant that he then had to go to the board and the trustees to say, look, we've got all these reserves that we've built up with. To make more impact, we need to start accessing that. And, he managed to negotiate and get there. But actually now, as a charity, they are growing and they're helping more people. And that's, I don't know how much your team gets involved in that side of things.
Absolutely, that's what it's there for at the end of the day. And you talk about my team, and we had one of our trainees, more corporately focused, and I think she couldn't get her head around the fact that this charity was not making a profit. And I said, well, for starters, we don't make profits, we make surpluses. We don't make profits, we're a not-for-profit organisation. Yeah. And actually, exactly as you say, Matt, the objective of a charity not-profit is to pursue its objects, in whatever area of charity it's working, not to make a profit. Now, I often also say that I think it's impossible for a charity to have the right amount of reserves. You'll get criticised either way. So either you're holding onto your war chest and you're not spending enough, doing the good job that you should be doing, or you're not holding enough money and therefore you're not demonstrating good financial governance and looking after, making sure that you're sensible. So I think that you mentioned the reserves policy. Every charity needs to have a reserves policy, and it's up to that charity, and that's people like us advise the charity then as to how they go about that. So I think often a normal reserves policy would be something like 6 to 9 months worth of expenditure. And the idea of that being, well, if we did lose that grant tomorrow, we're going to need a run-off time. We've got all these people we're employing. We've got a lease we've signed up to here. So you need to have something in there while you're making a plan to work out what you do next. Yeah. So I think it's about, and again, that's something where we would advise charity not-for-profit to say, well, what are your reserves? Why are they that? What's the plan, and how can we make sure we present the overall financial statements to make sure that's all supported?
Yeah, and your advice, I guess, needs to change and be updated as government's bringing new rules or things like the national insurance contribution changes. I suppose that's why you exist to keep on checking in with all your charity clients and say, okay, well, this now impacts you in a particular way. Is that right?
Absolutely right. I mean, again, there's things will always change. Whether it's international auditing standards requiring us to present things in different ways, or it's government policy, meaning that I mean, I've got one charity that springs to mind. Their income's only a couple of million or so a year, but as a result of the changes to the employer's NI and the minimum wage, which didn't just impact the people at the bottom, by the way. Because they then had to look at the next rung up and the next rung up. And so, well, if we increase their money, they're now only earning £50 a month less than this person who's got so much more responsibility. So we'll need to put theirs up and theirs up. So the knock-on effect all around cost them, it was a 5-figure sum in terms of the extra costs that they made on them. So I think that's then our job in also to advise clients, and we've looked at it ourselves as a business and how can we make the savings, and it's sharing those pearls of wisdom. So the two areas that we've looked at is, number one, while it's available, any apprenticeship schemes that you can take advantage of, then get that. So if it's paying for your training for your employees, wonderful. So if you get anything that's funded, there are still programs out there that can be funded. And then another example is salary sacrifice. So if you've got employees, if you've got people in your team there that actually maybe don't need the disposable income day to day, they're more maybe looking towards the future in their pension fund. Well, actually, you could salary sacrifice some of their actual money for pension payment, and that provides national insurance savings. So something that we've done and we've suggested that you could almost say to employees, look, actually, if you want to take some of your money and put it into a pension plan, we'll go halves on the savings. So actually, we'll put more than you would have got normally into that, and we'll save 50% of that in national insurance saving as well. So again, it's taken a very negative thing and then trying to turn it into a positive and saying, these are ways we can make it happen.
Yeah. Sort of looking ahead into the future, are there one or two key pieces of advice or considerations that you would be giving to a charity leader right now?
It's tough out there. I mean, let's be honest, it's been tough for a little while now, certainly post-COVID. we're all maybe got less money jingling about in our pockets than we had beforehand. So as I mentioned, the foundation is working on this brokerage project to try and unleash the potential of school-based volunteering. I think it's something that a lot of charities are not investigating enough. They bring in a fundraising team that goes out there and wins money, and their objective is to bring money in. Well, maybe thinking outside the box is a little bit. And to charity leaders at the moment, all right, we've got all these constraints and all these things we're fighting with. Yes, absolutely. But perhaps something that is untapped is to get the message out there saying, well, actually, we need support. So I'll give you a good example. At the moment, we're bringing, as RPD as an accounting firm at the moment, we're bringing our own volunteering day a year policy for the team. So each individual member of the team gets a volunteer day to go and do something. Now, advice from Darren, he said, don't make it a day, make it hours. And I said, well, why make it hours? He said, because if you give them 8 hours a year, what you can do there, for starters, was 2 examples. Number one, you might be able to help one of those transport companies who are always looking for volunteer drivers. Now, if you've got Mrs. Perkins that needs to go off to the doctors once a quarter and then needs a driver, there's 2 hours once a quarter. And that time's gold dust. And that conversation with Mrs. Perkins in the pant while driving could be gold dust to Mrs. Perkins. And you're really making the most of that time in the nicest possible way. Or using the skill-based volunteering, we've got so many charities that don't have treasurers or that have the skills that they would ideally like. We're a bunch of best part 60 accountants at the end of the day, so we could spend 2 hours a quarter attending a finance committee meeting, providing some guidance and support on things like VAT pitfalls, NIC savings, gift aid opportunities that we haven't opened up. So that time could be spent really, really cleverly. So I think it's so, we're all the same, aren't we? Whether we're running a business or a charity, you get caught on the day to day. And sometimes taking a step back in that strategy and thinking, well, actually, how can we do more? Back to the objective. At the end of the day, the objective of this charity is to do X. How best to do that? And it might not be the way we've always done it.
Yeah. There is something here. I think we must have talked about it. I don't know a lot about it, but there was something about a Charities Commission update on decision making, apparently. And there was it says here, some key principles that are important to highlight. Can you remember what they are?
Well, I mean, I think what I'll do is I'll take a step back and actually, they have got they've got the 7 principles that they put out there, which are, most of them are quite common sense, but the Charity Commission have rebooted something called the Governance Code.
Right.
And I think the Governance Code it's excellent. So I mentioned those new startup charities. And it just says, this is how we expect you to govern yourselves in running a charity. So they'll put a committee together. Who's going to be the chair? Who's going to be the treasurer? How are we going to work? So it gives some structure and ideas as to how to do that. So there's some really good compliance stuff in there. The Charity Commission, if you can wade your way through, actually does have some really good guidance in there as well. And there's something that I would recommend to new trustees, because I do a bit of trustee training on the responsibilities of being a trustee of a charity. There's something called the Essential Trustee, which is a document that they've issued. It's a bit of a long read, but I think it's quite good. I don't think it's too scary, but I think it just says, well, hang on a minute, if I am a trustee of a charity, what are my responsibilities and what do I need to be doing? So I think that's really good. And the other thing the Governance Code references, and I think it's probably the cornerstone really of any not-for-profit that's operating, is to make sure you've got a good risk register. At the end of the day, like any good business should really, it's understanding the risks that are appropriate and are relevant to that charity. And it breaks down things like, well, what are our operational risks? What are we doing day to day? Do we need DBS checks for the team that are going out there and working with vulnerable people? What are our financial risks? Where's the money coming from? What's the plan? Have we done the business plan? Have we done the cash flow forecast? And then what are the property risks? So if we have a property, are we okay? Are we insured? If someone comes in, trips over, are we exposed? So by putting your risk register together, and you should be looking at that Charity Commission guidance there at least once a year, it means you take a step back and make sure that you're running everything right in the nicest possible way. And being brutally honest, the vast majority of charities you look after are already doing it, because a lot of it's common sense, such as getting insurance. But I think putting it down in writing, I think helps a brainchild and actually does throw up a few things here and there whereby actually we haven't thought about that. We haven't thought about our policy on managing volunteers. for example. So perhaps that's something we do need to, maybe we need to invest some of these funds in getting a volunteer manager who can manage the 50 volunteers we've got at the moment. So I think it identifies high risk areas, and then you can, I guess, tailor your strategy accordingly.
Excellent. Well, I think, Darren, what I really like about our conversation we've had today is the practical. There's practical insight in this conversation. You've highlighted that, how financial advice links to, charity delivering more impact. Bit of a stretch, but perhaps, is there one final key takeaway that you like all the listeners, all my audience to remember when it comes to sort of charity finances?
Well, I think at the end of the day, I'm trying to work out how holistically I answer this, Matt, but I think I have huge admiration for the charity sector. Certainly in the UK, I do think we're pioneers in the world, and we take up an awful lot of the heavy lifting, the charity sector, that maybe public sector's not supplying in a lot of ways. So I actually think collaboration is the biggest thing, I would say, in terms of going forward. And yes, into the finances, absolutely. I want to help more charities. I don't have enough money, but how can I help? Seek out organisations like the Foundation. Talk to your local CVS, which is Community Voluntary Service organisation, and seeing how maybe you can make a difference and help. And from the charity perspective, engage that. Don't have it's the whole half glass full versus half glass empty. If you've got people that are willing to help and support, be it financially, don't be afraid of it. Don't be afraid of doing fundraisers and looking to secure more funds. But I guess, as you'd expect an accountant to say all the time at the end of the day, is just, if you're going to do that, just get some advice.
And when it comes to advice, you've got a newsletter that people can sign up to, is that right?
We do, yeah. In fact, we've got one out at the moment. I think it's called our Spring Update, but it's fairly up to date. All of our clients are invited to join that, and anyone who would like a copy of that, I'm very happy to send that out.
Well, what I'll do, Darren, is that the article that accompanies the video, we'll put the links to the newsletter sign up and your contact details as well, if that's okay. So people hear and say, actually, I want to check in, they can do that. So that's brilliant.
Of course.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Really, really helpful, insightful, exactly what Between Me and You is all about. So thank you, Darren.
Pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So that's all for this episode of Between Me and You. Be sure to check out our next conversation, and I'll see you next time.